Okay, we're gonna try something new today. I'm working in CASEIN, which is a milk-based paint. I think it's the milk protein. So it's a lot like gouache. One benefit is that it does become a little more permanent over time. So once it dries, it won't reactivate like gouache once it dries completely. So I'm gonna be painting this pear, and I'm gonna do a little bit of a sacrifice here because I love these pears when they're this ripe. And yesterday I bit into one and just thought it looked really beautiful. So I'm gonna try to just not eat the entire thing, but take a couple bites and then paint it. So here goes. So I have it on a paper towel here. Now I'm just trying to arrange it in a pleasing position. All right, let's try this. I also have some lemon juice. So I'm gonna spray this down with the lemon juice to hopefully keep it from browning. All right, now I have to work quickly because I don't know if the lemon juice is gonna work. Starting out with some Naples yellow with a bit of the Shiva green. I'm using Richeson paint. Oops, actually let's sketch this in first. Got a little too ambitious. Using my hands as a viewfinder, kind of figuring out where the center is. Yeah, that's about right. I'm gonna keep it really quick. So I'm breaking it into simple shapes. There's bite marks, different planes too. Here, 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 and then this part is pretty untouched. And the paper towel comes up like this. All right, I'm gonna flip my paper up so it's at the right angle so I can make sure the drawing is somewhat correct. Doesn't need to be exact, but when you're painting on a flat surface like that, it's easy to get a distorted drawing. So it's good to face it up every now and then. Since it's a pretty organic object, it doesn't matter quite as much. All right, let's get in some of these warm bits. And I love these pears when they're this ripe because they turn this really pretty yellow. But they still have some of these greens in there. So the paint handles a lot like gouache. It's nothing too new or foreign to me. I can work in basically the same manner. Right. I do find some of the paint consistencies to be a little odd. I'm using older paints because I did try using these a while ago and I didn't like it because the smell is very kind of like a cleaner, very chemically smelling. But I've heard a lot of people say they like it, so try it yourself. You might actually really like it. Again, I'm trying to separate the warm spots and the cool spots, and I can blend it in like that. But this spot here is where it's hitting the light. And I'm only using natural light right now. Alright, I want to get in some of the shadows as well. Actually, let's get in some of the stem. Using a little bit of black and burnt sienna. The black acts kind of like a cool tone. There's different kinds of blacks out there. I don't know about for CASEIN, but for gouache and stuff, there's like warm blacks and cool blacks. I tend to use ivory black, which is a cool black. And by cool, I mean it leans more blue when you add white to it. Again, there's some reflective light. I see some of this yellow coming onto the shadow, but it isn't as yellow as the pear itself. Okay. So once again, I am just looking to fill up and block in everything. I can always change stuff later. I'm using a little more of a saturated color than than you would think, because I'm going to be going over it with white, but right now I want these pretty colors to come through. I'm going to be focusing on some nice sharp edges of those paper towels. Of course, it's going to bleed because of how wet I'm working, but it's okay for now because I'm going to be going over everything. Alright, I'm going to try to build up the paint a little more on the pear because I'm noticing it kind of starting to sweat, as gross as that sounds. And I want to make sure I get pretty accurate colors in case it changes. So when you're working, you have to be pretty flexible and ready to totally switch gears. There really isn't a yellow medium, at least not in the kits that was provided. So I have more of a yellow ochre, and then this bright lemon yellow, which is Naples yellow. That's one thing I don't really like about this paint, is that there isn't as much variety, and I find a lot of these colors are very similar. So I have this light red color, which is actually very similar to burnt sienna, to the point where I don't think you need both. So here, that's the light red there, and here's the burnt sienna. So they're very close. I even did a swatch test, and they're just slightly different. I also have this is my mistake, but I got a yellow ochre and then a golden ochre which is almost exactly the same again. There's maybe a tiny bit different, but not enough. And the Naples yellow is almost the same as a cadmium light yellow. So just be aware. Okay. Adding a bit of red in here. It's already starting to brown a bit. It's going to be interesting. I want to block in the background color really quick, which is kind of a yellow ochre, burnt sienna with a little bit of ultramarine blue to tone it back. If I just use burnt sienna and yellow ochre, it would be too bright, too saturated. So I try to add a little bit of blue to desaturate it a little. You all know my favorite part is painting the negative space, which is what we're doing right now, all the space around the object. And this is a great tool, especially if you find that your drawings are usually off. By looking at it into abstract shapes, it's a lot easier. All right, and making it a little bit darker in the foreground, maybe a little bit warmer, because having warm and higher contrast stuff brings things forward. Generally, there's always exceptions to the rule. Now, pay attention to how much the values change. I'm still new to this medium, so I'm curious what we all see. All right. I'm using the same palette as my gouache, just a, what is it called? Miello watercolor palette. It's Airtight. I don't know if that's a good thing or what with this. I like painting slightly transparent things, like this paper towel. You get a lot of cool stuff happening. Okay. I'm going to work a bit more on the pear. Oops. My colors are getting a little muddy. Adding some of this cadmium red that I have. It's a nice red. It's a little bit too light. So one thing that's kind of annoying, I'm using semi-old paints, but the consistencies can be pretty rubbery. So here's the ultramarine blue, and it's just like this little blob that I'm stabbing That's all right. Working on these dark darks and light lights, because values are very important. Arguably the most important part are getting correct values. Adding a tiny bit of red to the shadow, because that's what I'm seeing. All right. I think I did a better bite mark yesterday, but that's okay. I bought these reusable bamboo towels, and supposedly you can throw them in the wash. My other terry cloth ones that I was telling you about, they are shedding everywhere, which you probably all thought in your head when you saw me using them. I did buy some scissors that do this kind of jagged edge here, which supposedly helps it from pilling or from shedding like that. But I need to throw them in the wash first. All right, I'm gonna get my highlights in here. It's kind of a cool highlight because it's natural light and it's a chilly, rainy, kind of wet day out. And there's some little highlights in here and also right here. All right. This part seems pretty important to me. So I am doing the Richeson challenge for gouache. I heard about it through James Gurney, and what's really cool is that they sent a bunch of materials out to the first people that signed up. So I got in on that. And I do like using these. There are definitely some challenges, but overall I find the paint to be really creamy, and I'm very interested in figuring out how to use it because it lasts a bit longer. It isn't quite as fragile as gouache. You know, once you're finished with a gouache painting, you have to be really careful about how you store it. Because if you get it wet, and I've done this to even old paintings, you're likely to ruin it. So you have to be really careful with gouache. I haven't seen how this handles that kind of stuff, but hopefully better. I'm not talking very well. It's hard to talk and paint. and I'm a little out of practice. Alright, let's get some of these greens going. I'm squinting, and I know that things need to be a little bit darker. I do feel like the value change isn't quite as bad. Yesterday I did some green onions on aquaboard, and I did notice the value changing quite a bit there, but it might have been just because of the aquaboard that I was using. I'm so used to it shifting anyway that I'm probably not the best person to judge. Pretty sure I got bit by a mosquito on my face before this, so my face itches really bad. Alright, still darkening some things. It's important to kind of mix your paint pretty well. Or at least for me. I know a lot of people get away with blending it on the surface, but I don't know. It's not really my kind of thing. This phthalo blue here is really bright, really potent. Going in and sharpening up some of these edges. The color does stain a bit, so your brushes might come out stained a blue or a dark purple, whatever color you're using. I don't love that. All right. The color back here is a little more yellow, but still desaturated and cooled down a bit. And it's always darker than you think when you're painting whites. A lot of people tend to see a white color and not push the values enough. So in our group that we have, the Art Refuge, I've had a lot of people mention troubles with white objects, and a lot of it is usually just a matter of darkening the surrounding colors. So remember, it's all relative. To make something like a yellow appear brighter, darken and desaturate the colors around it. To make something like a white appear lighter, darken what's around it. Seems simple when you think about it, but it's not always easy to remember. All right. And the colors in the white paper towel are shifting a lot. It's almost like each brush stroke needs a different color. Seeing a little bit of kind of a purple down here. Still mixed in with this yellow. And I have natural light and a little bit of artificial light overhead. I just realized that. And the paper towels I use, they're all these like eco-friendly ones, so they're pretty thin. The lightest part is here. It's being hit by window light coming this direction. All right, I'm gonna do another pass of the background. Again, using burnt sienna, a little bit of white, some ultramarine blue stabbing here. That was too much stabbing. Gotta bring back some of the warmth. And just like gouache, I'm using thicker paint. Now that I'm a little more sure of where and what colors I want. And it's getting cooler on this side too. So let's add a little more blue over here. I'm wondering how much of this underlayer is going to come through. And if I'm shifting my values correctly, because I'm so used to working with gouache, and I kind of have it figured out how much it's going to change. Whoa, some bright red. Sorry you can't see the palette. I'm going to figure out a better system, hopefully, since we all have some more time on our hands. For these towels, I really want to pay close attention to how it's curving and shaped, how it's laying on the surface. Add a little more blue. This phthalo blue actually looks a lot like ultramarine blue on the palette, so whew, whoa, not intended to do that. Never fear. Just wipe it off a little bit and then I'll go over it again. So I'm really cooling it down on this side because I want this pear to stand out, this warm pear. Even gonna add a little bit of this phthalo blue. Again, straight lines. Okay. Here, actually, maybe I can scooch this over a bit and this over a bit so you can at least see this part here. And I've done pretty much all of this with a 3/4 inch flat shader. It's my Artscape. I don't know where I got it from. Using some of my sheddy terry towels. Alright. Let's go down a brush size. Here's my 1/4 inch flat. I should have washed these better because I used these for CASEIN yesterday. And you're supposed to wash your brushes really well because since it is more permanent, it can kind of gunk up your brushes and ruin them, is what I read. Again, I'm pretty new and just doing a trial today and kind of showing you how it's going. So there's some browning happening right now. I'm kind of pushing and blending some of these parts and leaving some of the edges sharp because I don't want like a stroke around everything. I don't want it to all be the same. But I do find that this kind of browning defines it a little bit better. It's a nice little addition. There's some more yellow too, kind of just underneath. All right. Now, it's hard to figure out how much of this detail I want to go into with the bite marks. I'm going to work on my lightest lights because I don't mind this being the pure white of the page, but I want to add a little bit of color. So since it's being hit by the natural light of the window, I'm using a white that's tinted with the phthalo blue. I think it has a little bit of ultramarine too. I just want to cover that up. I personally find the white of the page a little bit distracting. I don't mind seeing it in other people's work, but it's a personal preference for my own work. And this kind of bluish color, when I squint, I see it a tiny bit here. And then it kind of is over here too. It's hard to make this look semi-transparent. Right here, it's pretty warm. So right now that I have everything blocked in, I'm really focusing and paying attention to subtle color changes. And I don't think a lot of people get to this point. So just don't quit, don't get frustrated, and just keep going. I love this part actually. I think it's so satisfying doing stroke by stroke. And then I'm always looking for, where else can I put this color? So I'm seeing more of a warmth on this side as the paper towel is kind of curling upwards. It gets a little cooler towards the edges. This is where the crease is on the paper towel, so there's this cool shift in the paint, or I don't know how to say it. There we go. Let's darken up some of these shadows. And since it's getting a little bit late, it is currently 4:30. It's getting darker naturally. I should have ideally started this a little bit earlier, but I haven't been in the right mindset lately. Kind of been moping around, not sure what to paint. A lot of people are suffering right now from, kind of an artist block or a lot of anxiety. Just don't feel guilty, don't feel bad. We're all going through this together. And people have different ways of getting through it, so if you just need to sit back and watch someone paint, that's fine. But I do think it really helps mentally if you're at least giving it a shot. It's always hard to get started, but once you get started, it's a huge relief. Oops, not dark enough. Now that the natural light's kind of fading, I'm seeing that I need to work on the background a bit more and lighten up some areas. Overall, this painting is looking pretty dark, so let's see where we can add a little more light. Since the paper towel is really thin, I want to emphasize that right there. And it gets a little bit lighter under here because the light's coming through it. And then it gets a little bit lighter over here. And darker. And warmer because you're getting some of the color of the table coming through under here. We have a little bit of this going on this curve over here. That's way too light. Kind of blending it. I want to get some of these lights on the pears again. It's a bit of a highlight here. Let's get some of this yellow. This yellow is kind of doing that weird floppy, rubbery texture. And I'm really building up the paint. I heard you're not supposed to work too thick with this, so I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that. It's just something to note. I feel like you can blend this a little easier than with gouache. So it's a little more like oil painting, which a lot of you might really like. This green, I feel like I could do without. It's so saturated. I've been using it a little bit, but I have to really tone it back. Alright. Need more of this yellow. Just working little bit by little bit. All right. I'm feeling pretty good about this so far. I want to pop some colors. Oops. Putting in some of these reds and oranges. For the most part, it hasn't browned too bad. So I would say my little lemon trick worked pretty well. Still have to work quickly. And then sharpening up this stem is gonna help. It's got a little bit of green at the base. Make it feel more natural. So I want to go back and emphasize a little more of this shadow where the pear is hitting the paper towel. This is going to ground it. I don't want it to be floating in space. So, kind of gonna do the same thing here. Darkening this shadow a bit where the stem is coming pretty close to the paper towel. And I'm also gonna darken the shadow a little bit. And warm it up. Again, it's probably shifting because of the changing light. So I have a habit of chasing the light, which is technically, well, it's known to be a big no-no. And chasing the light is, as it sounds, you're kind of following the way the light is changing. So if you're painting a sunset or something like that, instead of just sticking with a freezing time, you're following the sun, and minute by minute you're actually painting the sunrise, but people don't get to see the whole thing, So it's generally wise to just pick one. Again, adding these warm bits and reflected light really helps. Helps unify it. Yeah, you can definitely blend better with this, which I like a lot. Some fruit flies are eyeing this pear. I'm gonna have to wrap this up soon. I want to focus on the bite a little bit more. Since after all, this is really what I want to focus on. It's less about the paper towel and more about the story. It's my dog howling. He must have been locked out. I'm gonna push this color within the pear, darkening it a bit. All right, getting there. Work on the stem a little more. Okay. I'm gonna do another pass on this background. First, clean up my palette a bit. These terry cloths work so much better at cleaning because you can kind of like scrub in there. Okay. Honestly, let's go with this 1-inch brush, Polar Flow by Creative Mark. I believe you can get those at Jerry's Artarama. Okay, I want to brighten this up a little bit. It's looking a little too gloomy. I don't think you need a lot of colors when you're starting out with a new medium. I probably have too many on here, to be honest. things up quite a bit. I'm just doing a tiny touch of this rose red, which is my cool red. So when I taught my workshop, one thing that I wasn't really expecting was that it's not common knowledge what's warm and cool. So let's go over that really quick. A warm yellow, I don't really have it in this palette, but it would be something that leans more towards an orange, and a cool yellow is like this, which is, I don't know if Naples yellow is supposed to be like this actually, but a cadmium yellow light or a lemon yellow, which kind of skews more towards the green side. As for reds, cadmium reds tend to be warmer. They skew more towards an orange also. And then you want like a cool red, which is this rose red, also alizarin crimson, or I use quinacridone magenta now. And then for the blues, there's a lot of controversy here. And to be honest, I don't really know what's the right one. But for me personally, I feel like the phthalo blue, which skews more towards a green. There's different shades of phthalo blue, but the green shade phthalo is warm in my opinion. And then the ultramarine blue, which has kind of a reddish, more purple tint to it, is the cool to me. But that can go in either direction. So I guess it's just whatever you want it to be. But personally, I feel like, you know, like a glacier, when the light's hitting it, it turns like that greenish blue. And that feels more like, sorry, I can't talk and paint. That feels warmer to me. And then shadow colors tend to be more of a purpley blue. So that feels cooler. But anyone that knows me knows that I am not the most technical artist. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. So the paint is still pretty wet in some areas, and you can kind of see how I'm blending stuff. It's way more forgivable than gouache at this point. Let's see if I can get a little more dimension in the bite. So here, I'm just kind of getting a feel for the planes. It's kind of rounding out here. I'm figuring out how I want to portray that. Okay, so still working on the bite. I'm noticing a lot more depth over here. You can tell when I'm focusing when I stop talking. There's this kind of transparent green yellow right at the edges, which is kind of interesting. It's darker than the peel of the pear, but it almost glows a little bit along the edges. All right, now let's see here. Add a few more highlights. You know, another problem people have is when they can't get the whites that they want is they're not going over it enough times. I usually do at least 2 or 3 passes. There's some of these juicy highlights in here. All right, get in there. Trying to see how good this does with a glaze technique. Using thin down water. It's been a crazy couple of days. All right. And let's get some. I want some of this to be a little bit lighter. If you hear that, that's the dogs. They're very rambunctious. Well, luckily we have a nice big yard and they can kind of run around. I'll lighten up this area a bit. I'm definitely seeing more green and kind of yellow on the paper towel. Can't tell if it's because of the lights changing, but I want to add it in because I kind of like it. I'm going to soften this edge here. And there's a little bit of bounce light from the paper towel hitting the pear. I want it to be very subtle. Almost done. You know, the pear isn't even in terrible shape right now. I might even be able to eat it. It's kind of gross. I was planning to just give it to the chickens. They will eat anything. Going down a brush size. This is one of my trusted Kolinsky hair brushes. Turkel. a couple of these around and just find them to hold the paint and water very well. And I can make all sorts of lines, from really fine lines to like wide brush strokes. All right. I'm gonna use the same color right here in the shadows. So I could get even more detailed and put in some of these little green dots that I'm seeing in the pear, but I don't think it's necessary. You know, when I have too much time on a subject, I tend to go overboard. And I think I'm starting to do that. So I'm going to stop in a second. Thank you for watching. Stay sane out there. Stay inside. And I'll be posting more of these for entertainment. Sorry, one last thing. I want to get a little more red. That's what I love about pears, is how many colors they have. They're so pretty. Okay, now I'm done. Thank you for watching.